first question is, did any one of you plan to become a mother? Is that something that you aspired to be? I know personally I did not. I went through college, and as a young woman, my idea of feminism was something that was stripped from motherhood, and more independence, more aspiring to be more masculine and powerful. And I wanted to be taken seriously, and I didn't want to be in service to somebody. And I remember the moment that changed, and I was in my own business, and someone brought a baby into the cafe, and there was just this biological reckoning that I couldn't step away from, and I had baby fever. And then all I wanted to do was desperately have a baby. And we tried, we actually made life decisions. We decided to close my business because working 5-6 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day, I knew I wouldn't be able to become a mother. And so after 4 years of trying, we were successful. So I think that's an interesting way to anchor the conversation, is that I was someone who very adamantly was opposed to motherhood and then very desperately wanted to be a mother. So does anyone else want to share an experience?
So my journey into motherhood started with something quite sad. When I was 36, I was in a partnership with Mr. Family, and there was a colon cancer diagnosis, and within a year that whole picture was done. And I knew very much that I wanted to have a child, so I did it by myself. It was an amazing thing that women can do. Went to a sperm bank and had a daughter when I was 38. So I definitely knew that I wanted to do that.
Thank you, Samantha. Kara is asking you to hold that microphone. Should we take it out of the stand? Oh, yeah. And if it's easier, just hold it closer.
Oh, all right. I didn't plan to have children either. I went to school, wandered around the country, and met my husband here in Kansas, and we didn't initially plan to have children, and then it happened, and I was 30, so I was a lot older, and they came along, and then it was like Hinduism, and I'm like, okay. But yeah, it wasn't something that was planned, but then I feel that in that happening was actually where I began to understand myself as a person too, and having these kids that can ultimately condense my identity too. Even though I don't believe my identity is completely surrounded in my mother, it helped condense everything else I knew about myself too, which was great. And in our belief system, in my cultural belief system, we believe that the children choose you from the other side. So it was like, oh, they were just finding their time. And then they decided to come down to the earth side. So yeah.
Anybody else?
So I also had a similar feeling when I was in graduate school, where people would tell me like, oh, you're going to be such a great mother, and I felt as if it was like trying to relegate me to a particular role, almost to like get me out of the way in a sense. And so I felt really strange about that. So I didn't have a feeling that I wanted to be a mother until I was 31, driving from, I grew up on the East Coast, so I go back every summer. So I'm driving in a plane for somewhere in Kentucky, and there's this voice in the head. Like, so that's when I was 31. Yeah. So it took a couple more years. There were projects that needed to happen, all of these things. And then I remember going into the interview for what became my tenure track job, where it was just really clear, where I was like, Davin and I are going to get married, and we're going to have kids. So I need to go get this job, like right now. So that then it set me up so that then I could basically apply for tenure, get married, get pregnant. It was more like get married, get tenure, get pregnant. But because I wanted that feeling of security. So there was like a deep level of planning So there was definite plans. Daphne, it was the same thing. I thought that there was only going to be one child, and then there was a voice in my head. So I was, I think, pregnant I was 5 months pregnant with Yura, and then there was just this voice in my head that was like, I want to be in the world. And I was like, I haven't even gotten this one. Who are you? And so it was like every single day for 2 years, like first birthing Yura, then convincing Dad that she had another baby, and then, until the day she was. Okay. So it's like the idea was there. But in the beginning, I thought it was something that I wasn't going to necessarily do, and then it became very clear that I didn't have a choice. So.
Hi. I think for me, the most important thing initially was to be in a couple where I felt secure. That was, I would not do it otherwise. That I was very clear about. And when I knew that I was with the right person, I went ahead. And by that time, I was 40. So that's how long it took.
Isn't it, I mean, when we say that artist mothers are not a monolith, I think even this first question showcases a range of how we approach motherhood or wanting to be a mother. This next question follows up. If anyone could share a moment when your identity both as artist and mother most clearly intersected, whether in your studio, at home, or in a public space. And this, it's a broad question, so however that hits you.
So I became a mother in 2003, and the U.S. was beginning to wage a war against Afghanistan, and the Twin Towers had been attacked, and it was an intense time to become a mother because it had a lot of uncertainty, and I think that the work was intersected by that. And the piece that I have here is called Byzantine Bread, and Eleanor was asking me what it meant. And Byzantine, when something is Byzantine, it usually was referred to the end of the Roman Empire. And I was feeling like I was at the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire and beginning the life as a mother.
Nancy, your daughter just recently went to college, and so recently you've become an empty nester, and we're also at an interesting political moment. Is that, do you see any connections between her birth and then her launch, in your work? Sometimes you hit an artist with a question and they're like, oh, maybe. It's something to think about. Yeah, I wonder, because those are also big changes. We talk a lot about birth, but I guess we haven't talked about launch. I'm still in the mid with my two, and yeah.
So the piece I have here is about postpartum care, and it birthed when I was closer to menopause. So it just took it took some time to figure out when the baby was born, and now my son's 24, he is out of the house. It takes a lot of processing and trying to figure out at the end of this, not the end of the journey, but at a part of your journey where they don't need you on a daily basis. To me, a lot of these things came together. There wasn't one moment when I saw motherhood and artistry, art making, but one of the things that really struck me has to do with the ethics of motherhood, which Eleanor was talking about when we were talking about putting the show together, was when I wanted to tell my kids how important it is to be true to yourself and to do things for the sake of doing them, not because they are a product. And I felt that's what I'm doing in my art. And that's when motherhood and my artistic practice really came together. The idea of we're not producers for the sake of buying and selling and capital, but it's knowledge. It's due diligence. It's working on something with integrity and honesty. And what I did in my artistic practice is what I wanted to do as a mother as well.
So I think this is changing now that you could be a mother and go to an artist residency. But most artist residencies don't allow you to have a child with you. And as a single parent, that really prohibited me from going to any artist residencies. However, I found one in Newfoundland, in Krukowski, Newfoundland, and I was allowed to take my 1-year-old daughter with me. And when we went to Canada for this residency, it was just the start of unfolding my daughter in what I did. And that also included being responsive to what she needed. So I think one of the things about being a mom and an artist is you might have this idea, I'm going to studio. I'm going to get studio all day. You get studio whenever you get studio. So that's one piece. The other has to do with like a letting go of your own artistic intention because of unexpected things. So I was living in Austin, Texas, and I had a studio. I had just stretched these enormous canvases, and I noticed the house was very quiet. Looking around, and my daughter, in her diapers, had found 2 of the biggest Sharpies I had. And it was just like making these marks on these huge canvases, and I, first. And then I went, well, I guess that's what I'm starting with. So yeah, a little intuition, improvisation.
Well, and your answer also made me realize I'm remiss. I forgot to recognize Laura is also one of the most amazing artists and in the exhibition, and also has the exhibition next door for 10 years in Heise, and it's a residency that is welcoming to families, and that was very intentional. And also Laura's work is the one, the 100 small tiny paintings that she made, if I remember correctly, in response to motherhood and the opportunity to make artwork. So some of those were probably made in the bathroom after nursing, right? Correct? So it really does become a negotiation and a response. Sukanya's, your answer too made me think of coming of age. And most often, as a student, we digest a lot of coming-of-age novels that are rooted on a male protagonist, and that coming of age is really adolescence into manhood, and then it kind of stops there. Of like, young man, maybe we could go into the seasons and be Frank Sinatra about it, but as a woman who's in perimenopause, and it is such a dramatic impact when these hormonal shifts happen, just like puberty. Someone last night called it cougar puberty. And it made me laugh because it's true. It's, you're up all night against your will, even though you're extremely tired. You're having all the waves, and now you have more responsibility and obligation. So I think the other thing that you spoke about with your work, it amounted to authority that comes with this age, like within this experience that we all have. And I think as a mother, you have to be an authority because you are responsible for children. But then as an artist or as a leader, it's so interesting to take a hold of your motherhood in a sense of applying that knowledge, authority, and experience just to your outward practice. So thank you very much for bringing that up in your answer. And this one actually this next question came to me as I drove down here. Do you have a memory or experience that's tied to you being mothered? So not you as mothered, but you being mothered. And it doesn't necessarily need to come from your biological parent or a woman. So if anyone, with that, okay.
I have a very interesting memory, and it came from my dad, my father. So I call myself first and foremost a storyteller. And my memory is of me just in India. Sometimes if the power gets turned off every once in a while, so we just go outside and sit, under the stars and lying down on a mat, and my dad telling me stories. And I absolutely love that. That's parenting, that's nurturing, not just, doesn't always come only from the mother. And I wanted to carry that memory and that idea of, and every story that he said was something new that he made up. So he was creating his own stories, and he tells me today that he was having as much fun telling those stories as I was listening to them. And the idea of this creating something and it being consumed and that circle, it really stuck with me. And the idea of art being ephemeral. It doesn't have to be something that's produced and created and sold. It just passes down memory and your DNA and generations. That really hit me during those times.
I think that's a very powerful point when we talk about art making. And we're sitting in a gallery surrounded by objects and installations, but true art really is about experience and humanity and how we digest our current state. So thank you for bringing that up. Does anybody else want to?
So just a short story about my maternal mother. She was the first unionized taxi cab driver who was a woman in New York City. And sometimes people have asked me where my bravery comes from having a child by myself. And I would say, she had a lot of moxie. So on her deathbed, she said to me, I'm going to do my best to do my grandmother's Jewish voice here. She said, Samantha, I left you some money. It's enough for you to get the car you want. Get the car you want, right? So she loved cars. And I think that was a particular mothering moment because that was a moment where she was very much seeing into who I am, right? Things that I liked. I don't think my parents would have ever said anything like that to me, but she did, right? So the ability to actually see, I don't know, what is that scene as a mother where you can kind of see the essence of somebody and then just hold it up? That's what she did.
Follow-up question, did you buy a car?
I did. I bought a Porsche Boxer. The one that was used and cheapest on the lot. And I drove it off the lot and I spun it out. And I drove it off the lot and I said, I'm sorry, this is not a Toyota. Can you teach me how to drive this?
Any other memories of being mothered that anyone would like to share?
There we go. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother, was very adamant about my artistic skills. She was the one who had pushed me into going to art school, and so it was a series of mothering from her that initiated. She must have saw something in me that I didn't see, and really advocated for me to be the artist I am today. So I feel like I carry that with me now, and that's something that has worked its way into my artistic practice where I try to share how generations of women pass on knowledge, and that's really been at the forefront of my work because of her and her advocating so strongly for me. And so it was a lot of things, like when I was pregnant, 8 months pregnant with my first child, she was like, I'm gonna give you a car. But I had to go back to Washington State from Kansas. And so I flew and I was 8 months pregnant. I got to go ahead. And it was the last time I actually saw my grandmother. So she got to see me pregnant. I was the oldest of all of my siblings and I was the last to have kids. And there was just this experience with her where I I felt like I was paying her back for everything that she had done for me. And I still feel like I'm doing that. So now, like, kind of back to the other question too, like the intersection of motherhood and artistic bliss. When my children volunteered to come help me, like paint a mural or something, and I didn't ask them, and they just want to come and have fun, that's that intersection as well. And I feel like that's my passing on what she has given me. And yeah, so I'll just hand this over to the middle person. There we go.
In my practice as a curator, the preview on Thursday, my 14-year-old, who has been in this gallery since they were in a walker. So at that time it was Henry and now Hazel. They're used to seeing art, and they walked this exhibition. They came back to me and they said, "Mom, this is the first exhibition that made me really want to stop and look at art." And it was really a moment where I was proud, because also as a teenager, and kids, they're all in their own headspace, but every once in a while you get that glimpse into that they're with you, and that you do have impact on them. And I have a curiosity. There's times like Philo invited our family to drive one of his art cars in the Lawrence art car parade. And so it's a Saturday day, and we're in a parade driving a car we did not make, but we're getting full credit for. Like, people are so excited. We're waving, and I said, I'm like, look, waving's at the magic wand. You wave and people will wave back, and they'll smile, like you have power. And then I stopped and I turned around and I go, you guys know this is not normal, right? You know this is not a normal family experience to drive an art car now, but also that interaction, with art on a daily basis, is that for our families and for our kids, it is normal. And then that's that question of what's normal. So this next one's kind of broad and maybe it's cheesy. How does motherhood inspire your practice?
I can start with that one. So I think part of it for me is because I was trained as a lens-based artist, and because when I started making things as a lens-based artist, I was working with my family. So my first major project was having conversations with my uncle, who was a veteran of the American Vietnam War, about the Iraq War. And that's their story really aughts. So it was always a custom to me to be engaged with my family as a methodology to understand things. So when I started when I was pregnant, and then had a zero, but particularly then in postpartum, it became evident to me that I was going to use my camera to figure out what this whole experience was. So that then when I was pregnant with Daphne, I was very measured using the camera to attempt to figure out what this whole thing was, after the first pregnancy. So I think that because my practice was already engaged in this type of investigation, like what was happening in my life was going to be the thing that was going to be taking my attention. So I think it was quite inspirational in that sense. And then the second thing for me is that there's always been a lot of social responsibility that runs around my artwork. So there's one thing to be responsible, and in this work there's part of these ideas of when is it time to feed them, and how, and all of those things, and what does it mean to parent in post-industrialism in America, but then also what is my responsibility to the larger socio-political environmental reality that they're going into. And so that the work also gets inspired not just because of a more general abstract idea that we need social justice, but a very specific reality that environmental health is going to deeply impact their futures. And it is a different motivation when it's biological. So those are the two ways I think there's inspiration.
would say that motherhood influences the work differently, just as children are moving targets and you change, you have to move with them and grow with them. And I talk about the piece that is here to say like how it influenced my motherhood. I was offered a New York solo show in 2002 to have it in 2003, and my daughter was born in February. So I was at home, kind of really like stuck there. I didn't go out for 2 months. So I set out the table like this kind of thing that you get at Costco or wherever. And in my New York small apartment, I laid out a piece of mylar and some ink and tiny little brushes. And I had done a residency in London at a place called Gasworks, and I had photographed all this lace from the Victoria and Albert Museum. And at the same time, I had been reading The Subversive Stitch by Rosika Parker. And I very much remember one of those passages, kind of like the history of what do women do in the context of the men's world, power, and how, what is it that women do when they are, like sitting in the corner, embroidering, and it's their thinking, right? And so the whole piece evolved in that way, putting it up, having it rolled up on a table in a small room, and basically tracing this lace almost as if it was a text, and textile is like text. The etymology is the same. So it was all about creating different gestures. As the days were moving on, and this world was also these worlds, the world of my personal life with a very small child, an infant, and then the world outside. So.
And I want to ask Bailey to, if you don't mind, your piece here in the exhibition is specifically references gun violence and being a mother in this day and age politically. I mean, and I can maybe just speak to you, for you, but as recently, like in our country and in my role in leadership, I have used my platform at the coalition to advocate against gun violence. So something that another one of our artists, Linda Lighton, also very much advocates for or against here in this country. And I've been working with Linda for probably about 10 years or so on that subject. Philo also, another artist here, he does work on the same subject. And we now, even again recently, have had what happened in Minnesota. But in my own family here in Kansas City, we experienced gun violence at my son's school. And Phil actually dodged bullets in an alleyway. It's so extensive, and it's so, the emotional reaction to that experience within our own family, but then just the witnessing and the continual witnessing. When we talk about war, Jim Leedy, who was the founder of the Art Center here, a war veteran and had a lot of trauma, and he had nightmares, and he ended up having this cathartic expression, and he made the war wall. And when it was displayed here, it took up that whole entire wall that Laura and Nancy's work and Mona's work is on. And after that expression, he was able to sleep. He was able to get it out. Did you have that kind of same cathartic release making this work? Did it feel like you were having impact?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to sit down. It is one of those pieces that it felt like it really needs to come out, because what happened was so impossible, and the silence of it. So I think when we make work, sometimes we're giving voice to those who are silenced, and we're remembering. When I was invited to do this show, I was okay, this is a topic, it's an event in the past, it's something so sad. Just 2 or 3 days before I came, there was another shooting, as you mentioned. And it's the worst thing you hope your work is doing, which is related to what is happening right now. I wish it's a thing in the past. But unfortunately, all our children face this, all the parents, all the mothers face this. Always send our little ones to school every day. I have an 11-year-old too. So to make this piece, I actually took her to Uvalde, I live in Texas. So we drove 3 hours to the schoolyard. We saw the memorial, we spent time here, and we drove home the same day. And I remember saying sorry to her the whole way. I was like, many times, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And she's like, don't say sorry to me, I get it. And that's so heartbreaking for a little kid to say, I get it. How could you get it? But thank you for asking.
I think that's another example of how motherhood, and also, again, when we claim motherhood, I don't feel like we actually have to be mom to hold that space. We think about definitions, I know kombucha has a mother, and that idea of getting to making space for birthing, creating. And something that honestly I'm working on writing about is that I wish more men would step into their own motherhood and their own mothering. So now let's shift again, and this next question is, how has motherhood shifted the way you approach your practice, whether in terms of subject matter, time, and material choices? I've already kind of spoke to this a little bit of having to adjust, but
Sure. So I can give you a very practical thing that I do. So I heard on a podcast about the Pomodoro method, the 25-minute timer. And there was, during the pandemic, when kids were just buzzing around me all the time, I would say, I'll give you 25 minutes, and I'll keep a timer for 25 minutes. And I'll play, ping pong or something with them. And at the end of 25 minutes, I'll walk away. It really helped, because especially during the pandemic, everybody's inside the house. And I have boys, they have a lot of energy, they want to run and play. And they didn't know, they were also figuring out what to do. And they needed mom, they needed, can you tell us what to do? Give us some, and I needed time for myself. So I would, this is a very practical thing that I did. The other piece of it, equipment-wise with me, is I do a lot of intricate hand-cut paper, so I use X-Acto blades. So I have to put the X-Acto blades and the paper cuts away, because they would play soccer inside the house. And I have a dog who was torn a lot of my paper cuts. Some of these practical things, that's what I wanted to share.
well, that makes me, just a show of hands, and artists in the audience too, how many have their studio in their home? Okay, how many have a studio outside the home? Back there? Okay, so overwhelmingly, we have home studios. I think that's interesting. You want to talk about that? Go for it.
So, at a certain age, the expectations, a lot of people say, so where's your studio? Can I come to your studio? It's my house. It's always been my house, because that's where all the creativity happens, right? Especially when you're parenting solos. So I've really come to this space where I accept that my life is a creative space. And part of it is that I had the honor of training when I was in grad school with people like the performance artist Linda Montana, who very much combined art and life and took spaces from life to show as artistic arenas. But so I really have thought about my practice as being distributed instead of saying that I do this, like what kind of artist are you? I'm more interested in like what kind of creative life do you lead and what does that look like? So I started growing vegetables and plants for myself and my daughter and some friends, and all of a sudden people started asking me, hey, can I buy these from you? And as prices go up and the quality of products goes down, all of a sudden I'm growing an urban farm, which just kind of happened naturally, which is also feeding the work that I'm doing. But the other piece is that that kind of nurturing of a harmed being part of my practice.
What kind of support structures, talking about, we talked a lot about balance, how we've shifted, how we've negotiated. What kind of, and mothered others, nurtured others, what kind of support structures do you have to continue to nurture your own practice?
I think part of it is, first, we're talking about space. Like, having space for me that's both in the house, because a lot of the work or inspiration comes from materials that are in our home space, so garden, and then also using domestic space as a staging zone. So part of it is having that support system of space, but we also have a backyard studio where I can go and shut the door. Not so privacy is part of that. But that is like that's allowed because my family is there. So I have a supportive husband. My kids understand that part of collaborating with me is making both rice. So that's like the other day they're like, Mama, play with me, and I was like, well, you have to play with me too. So that's making things. So I think time and space are part of the support, and then we go to Vermont in the summer where my family is. So my parents will watch the girls sometimes. So Davin and I can go to residencies, or we'll take them to residencies. So having structures, because Adira went on her first residency when she was 6 months old, 8 months old with me. We stayed with a friend of mine who had also invited us to be in this museum space. So having support systems of family residencies that let us do that is also very, very important.
So we're going to shift into a little bit more of political society expectations here. Did you ever feel that there was a time being a mother prevented you from opportunities, and in your work or in your experience as an artist? Everybody wants to talk about this. Hold on, I'm going to pass my mic here.
Oh yeah, I think they'll pass it down.
Okay,
Yes.
I had a belly that wasn't too visible, and I was a candidate for a visiting artist gig that was prestigious at that time. And the person that was doing a studio visit and doing an interview, I was a shoo-in, and he came to my studio, and I could just see like the kind of like glance at the belly, and I didn't get it.
I don't think I have one. I think it's just an endless stream of observations of denial, or being looked at as kind of lesser. And there's this strange passage for me anyway, being a woman, which is that your younger life is all about being looked at, right? And then all of a sudden you have a baby, and now you have a role, or you're fulfilling the role that you talk about. And then as you move toward menopause, it's like all of that. And so as you move through those roles, it's only this really early time. It's about being looked at, where I think there's that sense of absolute artistic contribution and not so many layers, but the motherhood thing really changes the game.
I think part of it for me was when my grad school mentor, who was a dear person, said to me, "Oh, Diana, you're going to become a breeder now." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." He was saying it in a loving way, though I will say he wasn't a complete. I want some more time. But it was this notion of this is how I'm going to be viewed. So that's when he used that language. It was like, oh, that's how I'm going to be seen in the art world now. And he also described to me, he's like, because he's now in his almost in his 80s, he was telling me, he's like, I know all these women who did not have kids, and I think that they're profoundly unhappy. So I can tell you that too, that there's going to be this struggle that if you don't have children, you're also going to feel this other thing. So it was this moment in my mind where I'm like, okay, like So I'm either going to be in a situation where, yes, there was lots of judgment once I had a belly, you know, or had a child. But then there's going to be this other potential judgment if I didn't have a child. And what was that going to be? You know, of like striving and this and this and this. So I feel like part of that is just a conundrum of sexism in New York, and not all the worlds, but this way, particularly in New York world. And is there, what are the systemic ways that we can address that in these systems so that the work is the thing that we're talking about?
I'm digesting that right now about the systemic and power struggles, and I think a lot of this, with how we digest our experience verbally and with language, and how in this society we specifically talk about motherhood. And often, I'm really right now struggling with the term caretaking because that seems like an assigned role versus, I haven't heard caretaking come out of any one of us here until just now. But mothers as caretakers feel more of in service. But what the words that we use is, I would say, powerful women, nurturing. And that's more benevolent. It's more giving to and giving of, and it requires the permission of the person that's giving it. And I wonder if we advocate for, like, and just start a subtle shift in language around that. But then this is another question, and this is political. You know, we're in the United States right now. We're in Missouri very specifically. We've lost the right to have an abortion, so the right to choose to not be a mother, which is interesting. And then the way that women are being spoken about, even the Chiefs football player, the kicker, who wants women to step aside and just be mother. So when we first approached this exhibition, I really wanted, all of the artists to have permission to submit work that had nothing to do with motherhood and to showcase their fullness, because just because we are all mothers, that's not our only lane, and that's not our only position. And I just find that was, I think, my initial hesitance to be a mom, was that I felt like I had more than, and that motherhood or mother in America right now is a very limited definition, and it's an assignment rather than a choice, or rather not even a choice, rather than like maybe a child from the other side talking to you and saying, hey, guess what? Whether or not you want to, I will be here. So does anybody else want to speak to maybe the current political climate of like how that's impacting your practice, or just even your artistic practice, academic work, just
I feel like my experience as a Native woman is a lot different because I come from a natural village culture. And so in a lot of our different tribes, it wasn't a power struggle like between the men and the women because we weren't equal. And so kind of seeing my grandmother's example and how she ran our family, she didn't run it, but it was equal positions between everybody. And so I never had walked through this world thinking that I was oppressed. Like I didn't see the world that way because I had my own power and my own say. And so when it became time for me to be a mother, it wasn't, you know, even though it wasn't like a choice, it just happened. You know, I fully embraced it, but then that's what I feel like I'm being an example to my daughters, and just walking and straddling that whole world of motherhood and how you have to balance it all. And me and my husband, the way that our dynamic is that, you know, we consult each other and we have equal positions in our home and how we run it. And so I didn't feel like that, but I lost the question.
No, but you bring up something that is so, actually, when I spoke about language and why it's so important, Phil and I were talking about this. There was a Native American man, and I don't know his name, was talking about when the Western expansion happened, that there were words that the discoverers said were untranslatable from Native American language, and he advocated and said they weren't untranslatable. It was just Western worldview could not understand the concepts and the power dynamics. Like they probably couldn't understand that women and men were equal, or that water was a living being and being spoken to as with autonomy. And it was that video and his talking about indigenous language and the Westerners not being able to understand, and then how they dismiss it as untranslatable, even though they just never were able to step out of their own worldview and into another understanding.
Yeah, like the way the structure of the government was based off of the 5 tribes are. And them appointing a leader, but what they didn't bring into that was that they always consulted a group of women in those decisions. And that's how the structure is for most of the different tribes. There was a group of elder women that they would consult before they even made any decisions. And I think people would misunderstand that because women, like doing this right now, is actually really against what our tribal protocols are when you're speaking in public. But that didn't mean that even if a man was speaking, he didn't consult a woman first. So there was a lot of misunderstanding. I think that also is how it works into my work, is because even though I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm Native, I'm also just a person and an artist, and it just, I feel like integrates itself into my work anyways, regardless of what I make, if it's directly about motherhood, if it's directly about my culture. I still, if I'm creating, it's just kind of making its way in there anyways, because I have to move around the structure of my family in order to make the work that I do, and it's incorporated into my family. It's all melded together, and so there's never going to be a disentanglement of it, you know. So
Everybody, go for it.
Can I speak a little bit about my experience growing up in a very different country? I'm 50 now, and at every stage, when I think I've always had I'm a creative being, I've always wanted to create, and I was actively not allowed to learn the arts. And throughout my schooling, I didn't have a single art class, not music, not dance, not drawing, painting, nothing. And whatever I would do, I would just do it by myself. There was no, literally self-taught. And coming to the United States on a dependent visa, coming from a fairly conservative family, I did not even think that you could be a mother and an artist at the same time. I did not have people around me. Yes, there were stories, but it was all far away. It was not my experience. And for the longest time, when my older child was born, and I have a gap between my 2 kids, it's almost like having 2 individual kids. It was only mothering, and I was far away from my family. My partner was in charge of the financial part of it, so it was a very traditional family. And it's only recently that it's almost like breaking the cocoon and coming out. I'm fiercely self-advocating for myself. And that's, and in today's climate, I feel like I have to do that all over again. After coming to this country for freedom and living my life, I have to do it all over again. Advocating for myself, like you said, my culture, my stories, it's become doubly important today. And I have 2 sons, which is another layer of, hey, listen to the woman in the family talk about the things that we have been through, what we're doing and what we're saying. Sorry, I'm getting a little excited. But it's been really tough to be an artist is to be privileged, to be able to use your voice and use your voice effectively and loudly and efficiently. I mean, I'm so stoked to be here with you all.
Yeah, I deeply appreciate what you're saying about that fight, and I think about that in terms of what that means today, in the sense of almost as if there's layers of effect that we have. So like the first concentric circle is just the act of us making things is a radical act. And then what does it mean in terms of what the rules might be of that? So I think about like addressing levels of perfectionism that might be imposed, or many times feeling as if I'm just generally set up to fail as a mother who is in society, or a female in the working world, in all of these ways. We're like, okay, if I can release those notions of perfectionism so that I'm just making things that then people can interact with, that in and of itself is its own radical act there, which then can echo up to, for me, because I'm raising girls, like, what does it mean to raise girls today? Like, what do they need in order to address all of those messages that are going to be coming at them, so that they are fortified as much as possible against what all of these other roles are going to be. So to me, that's the next layer. And then the next part is like what are the, and I always have this moment where I have to sort out like, what is just activism? What is just like when I need to be making phone calls or talking to people, or letter writing campaigns, whatever those things are. And then when does it intersect with the work so that I can platform something? And then the other thing that I think about, because I am an academic, and I'm also a tenured professor, is that I have a very strong platform. So the development of my curriculum is a way to echo different methods in which to make and enact art and creativity in the world. So when does that become the appropriate platform to make sure that young people have as diverse and expansive of a foundation to then go out in the world, and that in itself is also an important or relevant act. So those things.
So I've been thinking a lot about activism as well as very, very active when I lived in New York, and listening to all these things. Let's see if we can have women not vote, and the trad wife. Let's just have the family vote, and then the trad wife movement, and recently the HIPAA. There's no HIPAA for women's reproductive health, so that's not covered anymore. And having a daughter, you're like, oh wow, surveillance state on your body. It's not only what you can and can't do, but you're a marked target walking around. But I had this conversation with my daughter, and I said, so, she's at KU. I said, what do you see? Like, what are your peers? What are you all doing in terms of feeling like how you might respond to this? Do you see activism on campus? And she said no, and I told her some stories about some of the marching I did, and all the signs and all the sayings, and she said, I don't think my generation knows how to do that. I think we need people to show us and lead us who have done that before. And so that's a much bigger question than just mothers. It's like everybody in this room. How do we do that?
I grew up in Bogota, Colombia, and when I moved to the States for the first time in the 80s, and I went to school in LA to Otis Art Institute, I remember encountering the Women's Building and feminism, the pattern and decoration movement, and being like, wow, this exists. And I immediately became a member. It's like, sign me up, I'm here. When I did grad school, which was in the 90s, there were so many women artists that didn't want any association with the feminist movement. I was signed on. I was like, I'm a feminist. I know what it is to be in a society where, where well, those rights are lesser or less, exist less. And I think we've dropped the ball, honestly. And I have to say, we all have to be activists. And we, as liberals, we all have to come together. And we can't be judgy of each other because we missed a pronoun or because we messed up a term or something like that. We really have to come together. This room, in fact, reminds me of the AIR space in New York, where all the early 70s feminists were. And I hope this continues. This is a great space.
This is really tied to when I first became a mother. I was pregnant, and I already shared I didn't want to be a mother, and I very much did. And same way, I wanted in my mind girls, and I was going to raise really strong feminists, and to be proud. And I remember at the ultrasound appointment when I found out the gender and learned it was a boy, I was like, oh, huh. And then I stopped because I didn't want to be disappointed in my pregnancy, I guess. And I stopped and rearranged it, and I thought, well, I guess I'm going to raise a really strong feminist. What? Oh yeah, yep. Yeah, and so on that note, we had a little more than an hour of questions that I came up with, and that we all came up with. But now that you've listened, do you have any questions that you'd like? All right, hold on.
I have a couple. So, I'm a senior at Panelists Arts 2, majoring in product design. So, a couple questions for the room and panelists. What does a mother's wisdom look like to you? And do you have any motherly advice? There was a lot of talk about postpartum, and so that kind of stems into this journey of motherhood. And my question to that is, where does that start, and what is motherhood? Is being a mother a full-time job? When does it end? But when does it really start? And then to segue into that is, we talked about coming of age novels that are centered around boys coming into manhood. Define what it means to come of age, especially as a woman. Are women inherently responsible for children and childcare? When and how do we incorporate men into the mix? And what does a matriarchy look like, and how does it function? That is it for now.
I'll just start to say it is 20 full-time jobs that don't end or start. They just are constant. So they don't ever end. I remember a good friend of mine's mom was saying, yeah, I know that I'm going to die, but they're going to still be talking to me from in the grave. So because you're talking, it's like I talk to my grandmothers all the time. It's an ancestral process. So
Just hopefully it's not about Minecraft anymore.
a lot of things. So it doesn't start.
Which question should I ask? There's no beginning and no end. When does motherhood start? I think the first time that I found out that I was pregnant, everything became about learning to take care of someone else. But awakening happened when I learned to take care of myself. And that took longer. And for me, it was important. Time is such a finite resource that when I felt, that was my awakening, is I have a limited amount of time. I love my children, but I need to make time for myself and to talk about things
that are important to me. So motherhood's one of them, but it's not the only one.
I was gonna say the same thing, it never stops. It never ends. It's 24/7. I felt maybe to address the matriarchy thing, and this is something that I get I want to be very protective of my daughters about labor, because I feel that as a default, labor falls to women and to kind of manage everything, and I'm already starting to see that happen to my daughters who are teenagers, and we have defaulted placing the labor on them when there are perfectly capable other people in the home who should be doing that, and how that takes up your time and resources, and I feel like that infringes on the time that we have to put our energy into other things when we're managing everything else. But the matriarchy about that is that you have this built-in, not desire, I wouldn't say it's a desire, but just this way of being to manage everything and know what's best for everybody all at once, and be the bearer and carrier of that on your shoulders. So it's something that's very difficult to shoulder, but something that you already begin to manage without even knowing that you're doing it. And I already see that happening with my daughters, because maybe they're mimicking me, you know, and how that I'm carrying everything.
And Mona, can I add to that? There's, as a society, look at how we play with our kids. It's in toddler stage, because we gift our kids babies.
Right.
We gift them baby dolls, and we start to mimic the labor that you're referencing. And meanwhile, I mean, with two young boys, they got, in American society, guns with soft bullets.
Yeah.
So what are we training our children to do, and the expectation of what they will become?
Yeah, and being very conscientious of the gender roles that my children had. I didn't want to raise my kids in that belief, like, you need to be a mother. And both of my daughters are artists, and I even didn't want to direct how they do their own art. Like, do what you want to do, be a mom if you want to be, whatever you need to be, I'll be there to support you, but I'm not going to direct you to do that. The same with my son, but it is a weird difference, because like my daughters never bothered to like pick up a stick, and my son, from the moment he was able to walk, he was like, I'm gonna grab the stick and I'm gonna carry it with me, and I wasn't like, hey, do this, you know.
I mean, there really is some biology going on.
Yeah, biology. So anyways, but yeah, here.
Can I add one quick thing? So I have two boys, and yes, I want to raise feminists as well. And I changed the conversation about cooking and cleaning into something that this is nutrition. This is what we do to take care of ourselves. And I have two really good cooks in the house. And one of the most important things, again, coming from a traditional Indian family, was I let go the control of the kitchen. If there is mess, okay, there is mess, it's not just my problem. You know, I needed to change that. So for you to be able to cook and feed yourself, and sometimes your mom and your dad, I shouldn't worry about the way things look.
So thinking about this question of where it starts, right? And Courtney, you were referencing what's sort of sold and accumulated and acted upon. But I was thinking also about this moment as an individual woman where you learn and really start to understand that your body can make another bleed. Mm-hmm. And then you start to hear all these things that people think about what it is to be a mother and how you should mother. That's a whole other set of circumstances where motherhood becomes like this competitive thing, right? Like competitive sport. But I think you learn very early on, like, that when you feel that and you see it, it's in your mind. Motherly advice. So one of the joys of being a mother has been really trying not to say, I want my kid to be like this, I want my kid to do this, I want my kid to be a doctor, whatever. But to really try to spend my time trying to see who she wants to become and supporting and keeping my own thoughts about that out of the way. And I think that's the best mothering any of us can do for ourselves, which is to kind of hold that intuition and that real sense of connection to how we feel and who we are. So the more you can do that, the better.
I've imbued a sense of motherhood into my leadership, and for my children, I view parenting as holding a lantern and lighting a path. And like any kind of obstacles that they might trip over, but I've also learned that they've got to burn their hands. They've got to trip over it, they've got to fail. But then bringing that forward into practice outside the home has been really powerful. And so again, I feel like that's a feminist lens on motherhood of saying like, this is a powerful position. I've tripped on these before, okay, there's a stick there, watch out. I'm gonna let Diana, then I'm gonna get to Monica's question and then wrap up so we have time to talk.
So just to add this idea of motherly advice, I think the other part of it is giving them the space to advocate for themselves. So I agree with Samantha in terms of you start to see who the person is, and then you want to help develop them. But part of having them develop is also learning how to have a voice. So, and that takes practice. So giving them the space to practice what it means to communicate what's going on with them. I think the other thing that I think about is how you were also asking about the household and things like this. And part of that is about having clear negotiations with your partner about how things are going to work. So I'm very lucky that I have a supportive partner that I never chosen for that reason. But that is key to be able to have that type of development happen. Because if that's a constant battle, then it's much more difficult.
I've been invited to I am probably the oldest feminist in this room.
Awesome.
And went to the whole women's movement and never 1 second thought I'd turn it out. One of the jobs that I had was I was an adjunct professor at the University of North Carolina, where I did the women's art department stuff. And one of the classes that I taught began with a column on the wall, men, women, and asked the class, co-ed, to put all of the words from perfect female, perfect male. And always the perfect male was aggressive, strong, rich, handsome. And the woman was pretty, feminine, nurturing, and everything. And then I erased the heading and I switched the heading. And the guys were like under, everything was nurturing, soft, kind, and the women was aggressive, and the guys were, what? And the women were, yeah. And one of the things that I made them see was, you're not alone, this isn't your battle. And I asked myself here, where are the men? We are women telling women what it's like to be a woman. And I would love to hear a panel discussion of this type with men, same questions. And that's what I learned in teaching this class. These aren't just women classes, women questions, these are human questions. And bravo to you, Mona, for your answers and for your talk. Thank you. You made us the most balanced answers that I've heard. So we're human. I'm not like you. We are maybe biologically different. Well, I just said in our classroom now. We're maybe biologically different. We have experiences that are different. But we're in this boat together.
Would you like to